Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, December 28, 2023. All managers are present except Manager Loftus, and we have no members of the public. So let's move to approval of the agenda, and note that the originally published agenda had discussion item 12.1, which has been removed. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Manager Sando moves. Is there a second? Manager Hizabod seconds. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the consent agenda are the December 14th board meeting minutes, approval of the 3 check registers for general checking account, surety checking account, and wire transfers, and 2 resolutions. 23085 is approval of the updated employee handbook, and 23086 is a resolution honoring the life and contributions of Eugene Hickok. Is there a motion to?
I'd like to amend, taking both of them off the consent.
Okay. We'll put that on action items. With that change, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Manager Miller and
Second.
second by Manager Maxwell. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I have no report, so I'll turn to you, Manager Miller, to give us an update on Policy and Planning Committee.
We had an extensive report on changing the boundaries of the Watershed District as it interfaces Lower Minnesota River Water Management Organization or Watershed District.
Watershed.
And at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. And it'll be coming to the board for its approval to recommend to the Bowser.
Thank you. Upcoming meetings and events are listed, including Metro Watersheds in January, where I'm the liaison, and CAC in January, where Manager Maxwell is the liaison. We'll move to item 7.1, which is the resolution regarding the employee handbook. Manager Miller, you had asked to have this pulled.
Yeah, I just want to know what the changes are. Okay.
Yes, I'm going to look to you or Deb to come present the changes. But as,
And you did give us a red line, I think. Do I remember that right? Yeah. Ms. Johnson and Ms. Vlasic, okay.
President White, Manager Miller. The changes were mostly made because of a new state law that takes effect January 1st, where sick time becomes earned sick and save time and expands what employees can use it for, how many hours. So we made that change, obviously, because we had to. But we also updated some things as far as just processes within the district and how we administer them. For example, postings, job postings. I completely lost my list in my head. Feel free to jump in. I don't have it pulled up, but it was the handbook was redlined in the packet, and I'm happy to go through that if you want.
Oh, but just the major changes, I don't talk about.
The sick and save time was the major change, and really what was the driving factor
Okay,
to change it.
great.
And then again, just processes within the district and,
Okay.
and how we administer. So, and then the idea is that we know that there are other changes that will be taking effect in the next year or two. So this is a phased approach. So we'll be doing additional updates that Tessa will bring to the committee meetings throughout 2024, and then have that approved. And then the big change again is on January 1st, 2026,
Okay.
where Minnesota has a new law for paid family leave. So they'll have to administer that as well. So you'll see this a couple more times in the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve, to adopt? Manager Miller moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson seconds. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 7.2 regarding Eugene Hickok. Manager Miller?
I just wanted to read the resolution into the minutes?
Go
if
for
that's
it.
okay?
Yep.
I gotta find them now. As some of us can remember who've been on the board a while, we've had a tremendous amount of support from engineers since 1967. And in the beginning of it all, the water expert in the area was widely recognized as Gene Hickok, and we had engineers like Mike and Chris all working for the companies that came down from there. And but he was kind of like the start of it all for the watershed. And so I just wanted to read into what the resolution is, honoring the life and contributions of Eugene Hickok. Eugene Hickok, whereas Eugene Hickok served the first district engineer for the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, having also studied the water resource needs and hydrology of the watershed to support the initial petition to establish a district in 1967. He's involved with that. Whereas Mr. Hickok prepared the district's first overall water management plan and regulatory standards and designed the district's initial capital improvement projects, including the Grays Bay Headwaters Control Structure and the Painters Creek Improvement Project. Whereas with assistance of Mr. Hickok, the MCWD successfully obtained a federal grant from the Environmental Protection Agency to develop one of the nation's first computerized models to calculate flood net storage potential in the upper watershed. Whereas Mr. Hickok served as MCWD's district engineer for 22 years, as well as a consulting engineer for 16 other watershed districts. Mr. Hickok contributed to water resources management in many places around the world through the World Health Organization. Whereas Mr. Hickok worked to set the MCWD on a firm foundation of science-based approach to watershed management, and the MCWD recognizes Mr. Hickok's many contributions with his Lifetime Stewardship Award in 2014. And whereas Mr. Hickok passed away on December 7th, 2023 at the age of 95. Now therefore be it resolved that the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District hereby expresses its gratitude for the life of Eugene Hickok and his many contributions to the Minnehaha Creek watershed and to watershed resource management and protection generally, and expresses condolence and good wishes to his family and loved ones on his passing.
Thank you. Would you
Thank
move
you for
the
doing that.
adoption?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the resolution.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Miller seconds. Any discussion?
Well, I know it was appropriate time, but somebody suggested that we send this resolution to one of his children. He had 8 children, 6 living, and so they get a copy of this. Is that appropriate?
It sure is.
Yeah, that's standard.
Send them to all 8.
Yeah, well,
That
just-
shouldn't be too hard to do, I wouldn't think.
Not everyone has their microphone on. I just noticed.
I
Could you
think-
redo microphones?
give that.
Certainly.
I think this son here will pass it on to the other children.
Well, I think it'd be worthwhile sending from the district to each one of the children.
Okay, very, very nice. My association, he's my brother-in-law, and I was at the Lafayette Country Club in 2014 when he received that. Very, very humble man. He's got quite the resume. So I'll do the research on the addresses of the other 6 children.
Great.
And
Good,
our
thank you.
condolences,
Thank you.
Manager
Yeah.
Sando.
No, I think it's worthwhile because
Yeah.
I served on the board in the 80s when Gene was our engineer. And we didn't have a staff. And he kept us on the straight and narrow. If it wasn't for the attorneys and the engineer, we would have been off in,
In jail.
well, yeah, at least, yeah.
No. Microphones.
I got it on.
Okay, Steve, your microphone.
Yeah.
But did you ever work for him, Chris? Okay. What was, when Gene quit attending the meetings, who was the, I can't come up with his name, the tall, thin guy?
Oh, I'm trying to think who that is now.
Not Mike Panzer. Someone
No,
else in
before
between.
Mike.
Before Mike.
Yeah.
And he moved to Denver.
Yeah.
I can't come up with his name. But that was the only I mean, if it wasn't for those guys, it would have been well, it's bad enough even with them, because we had a board that was super active in wrong directions many times.
Should we vote?
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mahadi,
Oh, yeah,
what's his first name?
Was it John?
No, that doesn't sound right, but anyhow.
Mr. Beck has item 11.1, Resolution 2383.
Okay. President White, Board of Managers, I'm here tonight before you to request authorization to release an RFP for the 2D watershed model build to support the climate action framework, and also purchase watershed modeling hardware to support the climate action framework model build. And so just as a high-level outline of the presentation tonight, first provide context of the climate action framework and how the watershed-wide model build fits into that. The past work that we've done on the watershed-wide model and how that's informing the RFP elements that are before you today, the timeline and budget for the RFP, and lastly, the recommendation for today. So to provide some context and as a reminder, the district developed a climate action framework that has 3 pillars, which include the Understand and Predict, Pillar 1, Convene and Plan, Pillar 2, and Implement, Measure, and Adapt, which is Pillar 3. And so what we're going to be focusing on today is that Pillar 1, Understand and Predict, which is where the watershed model really fits in. And so the reason why we're talking about the watershed-wide model in context of the climate action framework was in early 2020, we identified that the current watershed model didn't have the resolution to identify the impacts of climate change at a high resolution and what the possible strategies, projects, and solutions might be in the face of climate change. And so from that, we identified identifying how a model could be built at the resolution and how we would move forward with that. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the RFP and how we intend to approach building the model, I think it's useful just to talk about how any watershed model is built so that we all have the same grounding. So the first phase of any model build is, number 1, obtaining the data sets necessary, which may include things like soils, land use to say how water is going to move off the landscape, stormwater pipes, which say how water is going to move from the landscape to our water resources, in addition to wetlands, ponds, and our lakes. And what you have to do is take that information, process it into a standard format that you can load into a model, in addition to fill any data gaps that you may have. The second phase of a model build is exactly what it sounded like, is building the model. So taking all that information that you've processed at a watershed-wide scale and loading it into the model in a format that it can take. After doing that, you run the model and then calibrate it with measured data, streamflow data, lake level data, to ensure that it's accurately predicting what water levels would be based on precipitation, to ensure that you can trust the results. And so if you take this information, you can imagine that if you scale it to 178 square mile watershed, it can be a little bit overwhelming with miles and miles of pipes, different, many, many lakes, wetlands, ponds. And so we were going to build out this watershed-wide model starting in 2020 and 2021 with a request to LCCMR, which is a statewide funding source. And we had 2 unsuccessful runs at obtaining funding. However, we didn't want to let that slow down the progress of the model. And so what we did in 2021, moving into 2022, was build out a pilot model. And the reason for building out a pilot model during this time was figuring out how to take in data and process it in a semi-automated way so that we could develop a standardized data set. In addition, identifying what the potential data gaps were going to be at a watershed scale. Because you can imagine with 29 communities, 2 counties, and multiple state agencies all owning stormwater infrastructure, it can get quite complicated quite fast. In addition, the data gaps, identifying what we think data gaps could be as we scale it watershed-wide. In addition, we wanted to understand which models could best answer our climate questions, which include what's going to be the impact of climate change and how do we address that through policy projects or what could be our strategy. And so understanding the benefits and drawbacks of each of the models tested. And from that, we built out that system and finished up that project earlier this year. And that really helped build the foundation of how we could move forward into the watershed-wide model. And so earlier this year, we started phase 1 of the watershed-wide model, which included obtaining all the watershed-wide data sets from our partner communities, standardizing those stormwater data sets into a single format, and lastly, collecting what we identified in the pilot model as data gaps. And so those things have moved forward, and we're in the final phases of this, which includes refining and implementing those automated systems to refine the data sets that we'd like to move into the model. Which brings us to the last phase, which is this phase 2, which ideally would have been taking all that information and loading it into the model to see if it would run, which is the LCCMR funded portion of this that we're moving forward. However, we've learned a lot over the past couple of years as we've built the pilot model and as Kaylee's worked with consultants to try and figure out how to process all of that data into a single format. And one of the things that we learned as we've built out these models, which is the district must understand the model that we're building as well as the consultant building it to ensure that it's going to answer the questions we need to answer for climate change. And the way that we think as we build out the model watershed-wide to do that is to separate and build the model in 2 different ways. First, the consultant will be building the lower watershed model, and that is to be expected and fairly commonplace when you hire a consultant to build a watershed model. However, district staff will be building the watershed model in the upper watershed. And the reason for that is, as you go through a model build, there's a lot of individual model decisions that you have to make throughout the entire model build. And what that means is that to bring a model all the way back to the beginning, if there's any disagreements on those decisions for model build, it takes quite a bit of effort. So ensuring that we understand the model, have ownership, and can answer the questions is really putting a lot of that responsibility on staff as much as we put it on a consultant. Some of the other learnings, we must have an agreed upon approach for building the model. And what we found out was you build a model and get really far, and what you do is then review the model. And if you have a lot of disagreements, again, about any one small decision that's made along the way, you have to go back, rebuild it, and then rerun it and have another review process. And that's quite time consuming, so what we've identified is how to approach that, which I'll talk about in a moment. Another item that we've noticed throughout this process was the majority of the data sets are really robust and readily available. However, the data that cities, the state, and counties don't have very detailed information in a digitized format of the volume of ponds and wetlands. So what those pond and wetland depths are to give you the volume of water they might store isn't readily available in any of these data sets, which if we're trying to identify what areas we need to improve the amount of storage we have to know how much storage we currently have if we're concerned about more volume coming in due to climate change. And so we had originally planned to have an RFP that would look pretty standard from a model build format, which is have the consultant review the data based on what we've collected so far, review the process we've developed to process the data into a standard format, build the model, see where there might be some critical data gaps, and collect those data to fill those data gaps. And lastly, build, calibrate, and document the model. However, because of those two learnings, which I had just talked about, which included adding at the very beginning a phase of just getting on the same page about how we will plan to build the model, and developing documentation of all the critical decision points along the way before we even begin building the model, so we know exactly how we're going to approach it. In addition, because there will be the district building the upper watershed model and the consultant building the lower watershed model, we want to make sure that there's consistency among the decisions being made along the way. And so that's why we add this critical task of developing the model approach first. Secondly, we wanted to develop that wetland and pond storage data set and incorporate it into our district-wide standardized data set that's going to be built, that will be available when we start this project, to ensure that there's a standardized wetland and pond storage data that anybody can use moving forward, not only just for the model, but for other uses as well. And we thought adding those two tasks into the RFP were really critical to ensure that we filled out those model learnings. The last, and what might seem like a trivial learning, was model run times can be prohibitively slow. What we found was the model could take a couple hours to run for just a small part of Edina. What you can imagine, if you scale that up to the entire watershed, it could become prohibitively slow to build out and test and run scenarios where your model run times could be 10, 20, 30 hours, which could be really a problem. And so what we did was compared the model run times from the pilot model, which took 100 minutes or more, and ran that same model on a few different test computers. And just for reference, the lower the amount of runtime, the better. And what we identified just from the computers that we had available to us is we could easily improve the runtimes by an order of magnitude, so 10 times faster. And so that really was important. In addition, we worked with the model developer to ensure that we were having hardware that can effectively run the model as quickly as possible. And so a lot of these technical learnings that we learned along the way made us quite nervous, whether it was the model run times or the pond and wetland data, but we used it to ensure that the RFP scope that we have, or the RFP that we're going to release, addresses all of those, and that we aren't surprised by anything as we move into the watershed-wide portion of the build. So with that, the budget for this project is, we've put a range of $580,000 to $620,000, and that's funded through the LCCMR grant that we received. And the release of the RFP, pending the approval of the board, will be likely as soon as possible as after approval. In addition, we'll have an informational interview in January, and the RFP closes in January. Interviews will be set for end of January, and ideally, we'd like to gain board approval for selection at the end of February. So with that, staff recommends approving Resolution 23-083 for authorization to release RFP for the watershed-wide model build. In addition, staff requests authorization to purchase a workstation for an amount not to exceed $13,000 to support the model build.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution? Manager Hishmati, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Olson. Questions for Mr. Beck? Manager Hishmati?
Brian, this is really complicated. Obviously, you described a really complicated process. Are there consultants who have the capability of doing this? Do we have enough people that we can find rather than having one consultant? Are there enough people out there that we can pick and choose?
President White, Board of Managers, yeah. There are a lot of consultants that are capable of doing this work. And I think that there's going to be more than one submission to the RFP. And so I think in addition to enough consultants that can do the work, we also are going to work with academics that can review all of the work that's being done. So whether or not just consultants can do it, I think, yes, absolutely. There's many consultants that can do this work. We want to also have it reviewed by an academic. And there may be value in having even the developer of the software review the model to some degree to get even further confirmation.
Okay.
So.
All right. So is the academic review and the going back to the software developer included in this budget, or is that separate?
So the budget that we've developed really is just for the model build, and we'd have to work with the academic to see how that could fit into it. There may be budget remaining depending on the submission, so I think that we've wanted to ensure that the consultants could build the model within the budget that we had for the LCCMR funding, so we're not going over on that. But identifying what it would cost to have that further review, I think we could definitely figure out.
So how much of, it's 580 to 620, what is the size of the LCCMR fund that we have, or how much of it will we be using up?
Yeah, Manager Hedgemati, the original grant was for $738,000, and a portion of that is going towards that phase 1 of the model build.
Yes,
And
yes.
so the remainder is 628,000 and change. I
Okay.
can get that number
So,
for you.
so it's just fits almost exactly?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So then if we go to working with academics or going to work with the software developer, we'll have to develop some, we'll have to fund that, I presume, is that what I'm thinking about?
Yeah, so Manager Hedgemati, we are under budget for the project that we're currently working on. And so I think the likelihood of us having some spare budget from that to potentially do academic review could be an option. But before we move towards allocating it towards that, we want to ensure that, number one, that project finishes and we don't, we're not trying to say budget could be
Right.
used over here. We want to ensure that it's still there. But yeah, I think it could need to be out of district funds potentially.
Okay. Well, the phase 1 seems to be going well.
Yeah, so far it's going really well. Kaylee could speak to that since you just had a call with the consultant today.
Okay.
Yeah, President White, Manager Hedgemati. We had 3 tasks for that scope. Task 1 was collecting stream channel cross sections.
Yes.
We've closed out that work and are getting the full kind of data set next week delivered, so that task is done. We did end up just focusing primarily on the creek, Minnehaha Creek proper, and less within the upper watershed region. Task 2 was our scripting refinement work to kind of address the range of issues at the watershed-wide scale. We're probably 25% through that task. Right now, focusing on identifying kind of the range of issues that are present at the watershed scale, and then getting into how to tackle those. And then our culvert gap assessment is also completed, and we have identified where we have likely gaps throughout the whole upper watershed. And we're, I think, happily surprised to see that there's only about 200 something gaps. So at least a reasonable number that we can think about fulfilling with like real measured data. So things are going well, and I think on budget and on track.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Manager Miller?
Any good or bad surprises?
I don't think so. Nothing
Okay, yeah.
unexpected. Yeah.
I think being done mostly with task 1 and task 3 mostly, and being under budget for both of them is a pleasant surprise.
That's
So,
an expectation, right?
oh,
Yeah.
I mean,
That's what I shoot for.
we met our expectations.
Yeah, yeah.
So once the model's built and the consultants, then we're done, are we gonna maintain it, or is that gonna be an ongoing maintenance fee for the consultant, or are we gonna try to maintain that in-house?
President White, managers, I think this model really is focused on answering climate questions. I think maintaining this model is a bigger question that we want to answer after.
It'll come, sooner or later it'll come to the top or bottom.
Yeah, and the question is, if we maintain this model long-term, what are we going to be using for? Because we identified this model to answer climate-specific questions, and if there's other things that we use models for, can the one that we're building now answer those as well? And we want to be careful that it can, instead of just answering or saying, well, it's a model, so we could use it for these other
Yeah,
things.
we wanna be able to adapt to different things along with it, so,
Yeah.
you know, and I understand that, but, yeah.
Anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Are there any inquiries, issues, or ideas that board members would like to bring forward?
Just a quick question for our administrator. James, have we ever done a creek dredging project that solved? I know we have remeandered the creek. We have done it twice now, or 3 times in large scale. But have we ever gone to an existing part of the creek that's historically been there and removed debris that caused it to get wider?
Not that I can think of. Most of our projects that are addressing a gradation in the creek have been holistic and stemming from out of the greenways, you mentioned the greenlanders, and then down in Arden Park. The only other instances where we've removed accumulated sediment from the creek is in our journey below the falls with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Park Board. I can't think of another project in more recent history where we've done removal of accumulated sediment from the creek banks.
Okay.
So there's a context for the question that might be constructed, but not that I can remember.
I'm thinking of the maintenance to the drainage channel that Three Rivers Park did to help Lake Zumbra,
Yeah.
and the significant impact it had on that water body to help it work its way down the system. And I was just curious as if there was any other places that had sedimented in, 3 foot above the original structure.
Yeah, I mean, your question was about Minnehaha Creek, and so I'd say no.
Yeah.
There's ditches that have been maintained over time through kind of the ditch proceedings, and the work that Three Rivers did is different even from that, in that it was sort of channel maintenance through a wetland area that they owned that wasn't part of the judicial ditch system. But in terms of doing that on Minnehaha Creek, I don't think that we have.
Thank you.
I'll bring up my annual question about bridgehead study opportunities.
Yep.
I see several places where properties are being offered for sale that would qualify for a bridgehead acquisition.
Thank you, Manager Miller. I've relayed that that request in the past explicitly to Mike Heyman, who it's been directed to in the past. So we will try and get something in front of the board. When Gabe Sherman was hired, and you first made this request to look up and down the creek at the bridgeheads at private lands that might be available for acquisition that would then build, contiguous corridors around the creek. We were just building out our GIS hub with Alex, and Gabe and Alex worked together to put together what we call now internally an opportunity screening map. It includes a whole host of different public and private data sets so that we can look at a geographic area and scan for opportunities. And so I think they took your proposal in earnest and went down further and sort of down a rabbit hole and built a tool for the whole organization. And most recently, I know Mike and Gabe have met to sort of wind back and say, let's actually break Minnehaha Creek Corridor into segments and do the land analysis that you want and try and get that, I think, in front of committee in some sort of digestible format. So I know that's a long-standing request, and we're, I don't know how you're counting the months. Maybe it's 6 months to a year behind schedule, but good progress has been made on it. And I do have a list, I don't know if these need to stay on the agenda in like a parking lot, but all the other issues, inquiries, and ideas right here.
Okay.
That we are keeping track of those and not losing tabs on them, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wister, may we have your report?
Yes, President White, just one item on the administrator's report this evening related to human resources and a little bit of background. I think I've mentioned in past meetings, we have grown the capability, I think, and also the tenure within the organization over the last 5 or 6 years. We're doing fairly well on human resources front in terms of retention. And as a result, we've entered kind of a new phase of human resource development beyond the initial restructuring that we went through in 2018, where we have a number of staff that are fairly well established within the organization that are either looking for the next level of growth or leadership opportunities. And so we've built a career ladder policy that outlines some clear criteria for how people can begin to frame a plan of their own to continue to bring value to the district in ways that support the growth of the organization, but also their career growth into a senior position. So a career ladder for promotions that's on merit. And similarly, we also have staff that are suited to just movement within the organization. And so we built an internal hiring process, knowing that for the first time in a long time, we have capable candidates internally that might outcompete the marketplace. And we've used that policy to ask for internal candidates to express interest in positions that we're opening up before we determine how we're competing in the marketplace for talent. And at a previous board meeting, I think it might have been the last one in November, I informed the board that Maggie Menden had moved from a permit assistant position to a technician. She filled a vacancy left in the program by Abigail Ernst, who left us recently to go work with Carver WMO. And more recently, we completed an internal interview process for Mike's team in project planning, and are really happy to announce that Kaylee Cermak is going to be moving from downstairs to upstairs to join the project planning team. So everybody here knows Kaylee, but a little bit of background. She's been with us quite a while, since 2013. So she's grown alongside the organization in really admirable ways. She navigated the restructure of research and monitoring, which saw probably the most change out of all of the departments in the organization, made herself indispensable in that program. Moving through research and monitoring from a coordinator position all the way up to hydrologist, and as the liaisons know and the board knows, delivered the pilot model along the way. And I think in that time, she's just proven herself a really capable project manager, an exceptional communicator, and a strong cultural fit. She's driven, growth-minded, she's a great collaborator, and she's shown grit when things invariably go wrong on projects, which is something that we're going to continue needing in the future. So that's my update. Please join me in congratulating Kaylee on her transition, which is going to become effective kind of the first thing in the new year on Tuesday, January 2nd. So she's in the process tomorrow of packing up her things and moving upstairs. And that has Brian, but also Becky, positioned next to put positions for policy planning and research and monitoring, the water resource scientist position out on the street for recruiting and interviewing and hiring. So we're hoping to get those out in the new year and hopefully welcome some new blood into policy planning and research and monitoring behind Kaylee to join Brian and his team and Becky and hers. So congrats to Kaylee for sticking with it since 2013 and doing a great job and being willing to take it.
Wonderful.
What's your exact title going to be?
Planner project manager. A planner project manager.
Thank you.
Planner, project manager, that seems like a contradiction of terms.
Yeah,
A planner and a manager.
yeah. It is.
She reaps what she sows?
I think, you know, when we went through in 2018, one of the things that we struggled with as we were building out the organization is getting all the titles just so. And I don't know that we struck perfection on there. I think, Dick, you encouraged me over the years to not call myself an administrator. And so, you know, I think titles might still be a work in progress, but it's really important as we think about our projects team is we love good project management, scope, schedule, budget. But a lot of project management can be viewed as contract management and consultant management. And our team has a significant degree of ownership over the creative direction that projects need to take. We've talked before, we're not project managing fixed assets like a city where we own roads and we own the park. We have to go out and be entrepreneurial, and there's a significant degree of planning involved. So the title's probably wholly imperfect, but project management's a significant discipline, but you don't have projects without really high quality planning and partnership building, so hence planner project
Well, you
manager.
made it through that pretty well.
Yeah.
That's-
Great.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, and we'll look forward to the new year and seeing everyone in January.